Greetings, I'm George from Pavliscak Studios, and I'll be making some glass marbles today, probably just one. I'm going to be making a flower marble called using the inside out or implosion technique. It essentially starts with a large clear glass rod that you melt the end of and you flatten, and the flattened area then becomes a canvas for you to draw your flower on in 2 dimensions. Then, by heating that disc with the two-dimensional flower drawn on it in a certain way so that the glass on the outside of the disc pulls forward and then rolls around and pushes that two-dimensional design up into the glass, essentially turning that disc inside out, is what causes the flower to bloom. And we'll get to see that probably in like 20 different minute iterations as we go along, from the making of the design basics to starting to make that disc and turn it inside out. Let me show you some of the materials I'll be using today. I'll be using a large clear glass rod, and this is what I'll be making my disc from and drawing the flower on two-dimensionally. And for the two-dimensional portion of the flower that will then bloom into a three-dimensional flower, I'm using some very fine glass threads, sometimes referred to as stringers, that I'm pulling from rods. This is kind of the standard size rod. This is what they call 5 to 6 millimeter rod. When you buy color from several of the now more popular brands, they come in rods of this size. And let's see if I can show you a bunch of rod colors in a jar that I use. And so you melt the ends and pull them into stringers. I'll demonstrate that too. And with these tiny threads you can draw very precisely your design, which I will then turn inside out for the flower. And today, as was mentioned in the pre-show, we're going to be, instead of doing one flower, it's going to be several tiny flowers that will be a part of a picture and will all bloom together. So let's start the torch, and what I'll do first is draw a few of those stringers from some color, and we might use those today, or I've already picked out some that I think will make nice tiny flowers, some black stamen and some red to do little tiny rosebuds. So let's pull maybe a nice red thread just for fun, because pulling down rods and making stringers and melting glass is just fun. So right now I'm flashing the rods. Those of you who have been with me before know that glass tends to be susceptible to thermal shock, and so you have to get it up past its first strain point, which is about 500 degrees here. And so by whizzing them through the flames, I'm just, every time it's going through the flame, it's getting heated up a few more degrees. And what I don't have is my protective eyewear. I'm going to grab that right now. See, purple filters out sodium flare and ultraviolet radiation so that I can look at these for hours and hours without it injuring my cornea. Once I flash this enough, and you can start seeing some of the edges turn orange, it's hot enough that you can put the rod into the flame and start heating it. I'm going to start putting these two rods together and continuing to melt them, and every once in a while I'll change the angle, increase the angle, and rotate them together, and I'll have a larger gather. The hot glass has rolled down along the edge of the rod and made a larger gather. Now I don't need a really big gather here, but I want the heat in that small gather to even out so that when it gets to the right temperature, I can pull it down into a thread. And by controlling the rate that I pull, I can control the ultimate size of the thread that I pulled. And in this case, I want like a 1.5–2 millimeter stringer to draw with. Now, it's a little bit long and ungainly for me to draw with, so I need to heat the tips of my tweezers and melt that in half and melt off that little piece and clean up the ends a little bit. Now, if there's a little ball on the end like that, that makes an ungainly blob to draw with. So I'm going to heat that and pull that blob off, put it in my, I have a little tin where I can take all my little chips of color that fly off. I put them in this little tin. And I can go back and say, I'm going to take all that red today and pull myself a new stringer, or make myself some little mini marbles. Color is the most expensive part of lamp working or torch working or glass blowing. And color can often be in the $20 to $150 a pound cost window, so you want to make sure you're not just damaging the color so it can't be reused. Anyway, so when I'm thinking about a flower, I'm going to draw it. I want to draw the inside and work my way outside. So I'm going to start with the stamen. In this case, they're going to be brown or black. And then the petals are going to be rosebuds, so they'll be like little curls of red. And then the leaves outside of the flower will be green. And I have all those colors ready right now. And I had some yellow and blue also ready to go. And there's also, I was kind of feeling like I wanted to do a pine cone. So I have I found a little brown one, and I might do a little teeny tiny pine cone marble once we're done with this multi-flower marble. So the first step in making a glass marble is planning. I'm flashing my hand, I don't need to do that. So many things are on automatic after you've done this a while. I'm flashing this rod. So you planned your marble a little bit. You mostly have all of your materials in front of you. I planned maybe one or two more steps than I normally would, because it's a very specific marble I want to make. A lot of times I have a really good idea what I want to do when I sit down, and other times I just want to make a few marbles and I see what sort of happens and with the first one, and maybe there's like a sub technique that I wanted to play with. And so I'm like, oh, I'll make a flower and then do this little thing that I've been thinking about or working on that I would love to try to practice a little more to like influence this portion of the design. And sometimes you just want to mush glass together and make something weird. So I flashed this large rod. Sometimes they're a little more particular about how much heat you put into them, how quickly. This one's ready to go, and so I'm going to heat it. I might have to go in and clean it because it had a cut end like this. And sometimes when you start heating a rod where it has a cut end, you're going to see as the rod heats up little tiny oxidized parts or impurities that you don't want to show up later in your marble as white patches or bubbles. So I will go in with a tweezer and get those off. And I can see on this rod that the whole cut end is a little foggy looking. I don't know if you can see it resolve there. You see the end, it's all a little foggy looking. It'll take me a second to get that back up to temperature. But I want to peel that all off. A lot of times rods, when they're shipped, especially these come from Italy, in shipping they rub together and the surface gets a little bit almost sanded. And so sometimes you do have to peel the surface off these rods sometimes. Now here that's looking pretty good. There's some small scratches in the rod, and by controlling the oxidation in your flame too, you can clean up some of those as you go. Now you can see that's looking hot and delightful. I'm just going to get that a little bit bigger. And the way to increase the size of a gather like this is it's naturally going to want to pull back into the rod, but if you just tilt your angle back a little bit like that, that ball as it heats up on the end, that gather, is going to roll back a little bit, ever so slightly, down the rod and increase in size. So once it gets going, I could increase that angle even more and have it go faster. There's like a good speed to go to. Too slow takes too long, you get bored. Too fast, and you're going to start oxidizing the surface of the glass, especially at the junction point where the gather meets the rod. If it starts becoming a sharp line and you're folding it over, you're going to be entraining air into your glass gather. And you don't want that, especially in a marble like this, where you want the clear to have to be as clear as possible so that you see the flower inside. Now when I flatten this down, I can just use gravity and push this down onto some impervious to heat surface. I'm going to use a marver plate, which is could be any flat surface that's not going to be damaged by hot glass. Steel is common. I use graphite. It pulls heat out of the glass a little bit faster, which I like for certain aspects of my work. In this case, instead of just pressing down, as I press down and the sphere of glass at the end starts to resolve into a disc, I'm going to start pushing down on the top edge of the disc to increase its diameter, to give me more room to draw the multiple flowers that I want to put on here. Now that gather is getting bigger, and it's about the size that I want to use. So I'm going to start pressing it on the marver plate next to me and push down on it with this mini marver plate, a paddle of the same graphite material that my marver plate is made out of. So gravity and pressure has done the trick and made it disc-shaped, and now I'm going to go back and make it even more disc-like with a larger diameter. It ends up looking like that. A big disc on the end of a rod. Now I'm going to draw my 3 flowers. I'm going to put 3 groups of little stamen in there, mentally dividing the disc into 3 areas and sort of picturing where I want those 3 flowers to go. So I've put 3 groups of 4 little black dots, which will become the stamen for the flowers that I'm going to make. I'm going to go back, and I want the stamen to come out past the surface of the flower that's blooming. So I'm going to melt those little black dots in to the surface of the disc. I'll show you that first. Then I'm going to take this little tool, pointy tool. I'm going to poke those dots in just ever so slightly. Poke them in about 1 millimeter into the surface of the disc to give them a head start on blooming upwards into the disc when we start turning this whole disc inside out. So I'm going to heat a few of those dots and poke them in. Probably be hard to see. So poke, hopefully in the center of those dots. So I've done 1 set of 4. I'm going to go back and do the next set of 4. Some of those are so tiny, I'm not going to get much poking in on them. Alright, now let me see if I can even that surface a little bit by heating it, and the surface tension of the glass as it makes the transition from solid to liquid will pull that surface a little bit smoother. Now I'm going to put the petals around those stamens. I'm going to turn down my torch so it's just a tiny pinpoint, and I can control my glass thread. So I tried to make a complete circuit and then add like another little petal around each group. Now I'm going to melt those in, and then once they're melted in, I'm going to start heating around the edge of the disc and holding it down like at an angle like this. And this disc is going to start to cup shape. When it cup shapes by about 3/8 of an inch, I'm going to flatten it back out. I'm going to keep doing that, cupping and pushing it flat. Each time I do that, I'm drawing some of the clear glass from around the edge of the disc and bringing it around into the middle and putting it in to the center area of the disc. It's not going completely around, but it's moving in that direction. So step by step, I am turning this inside out, not all at once. So it started to cup shape and I flattened it out. It was a little bit uneven, so I wanted to get it flat again. Let me see if I can get a nice cup shape on this, and then I'll show you that. And we'll go through several levels of cupping and pushing. There you can see it's cupping. I'll let it cup a little bit more and then push it flat. Like that. We'll do it one more time and we might be able to start seeing it come up into the disc. Sort of that two-dimensional painting is blooming up. So I'm heating the middle of the disc as well as the edge, so that as it cups and pushes, that image is movable and soft and will move along with the inside out process that I'm doing. If I let the surface of the disc get hard, it won't shrink, it won't turn inside out. So here you can see it's already shrunken quite a bit. Now I have some room around the edge to put some petals. So let's get our green thread out. And we'll turn our flame down to a pencil point and give each flower a few of its own leaves. And if there's room, maybe something that they shared. Oh, there won't be room. So I put on some leaves going around. Now we'll melt those in. And reflatten the disc. It's getting a little crooked, so I'm going to straighten it out. There we go. So here you can see those little, what will be rosebuds with the leaves around, which will essentially be narrow leaves that will creep up along the sides. Now we're going to cup and push a few times and see how this all blooms together. going to do it one more time, one more cup, and push. And you'll be able to see this bloom from the side. Let's see, there's one flower and a little stamen in the middle. There's the next one. There's the next one. On the side it doesn't look like a lot, but from this side it's already looking flowerish, and from the back looks the same yet, just a little bit smaller overall. So we're going to do it probably another 2 or 3 times, see where we get. If you do it a few times in a row, you can actually be cupping and pushing, you know, almost every few seconds with soft glass. But it's also nice to slow down and see what's happening. Now I can, without even changing the angle by the magnifying glass, I can see that these are blooming up into the disc. And the disc itself, as it's turning inside out, surface tension from the heating of the glass is starting to pull it into more of a marble shape. And I'm going to let that continue. So we're taking glass from around and pushing it up through, so it cups down. And as my fingers are cupping down, that's the glass from all the way around falling down. And then we're going to push it back up in by flattening it. Let's do it a few more times. And I can even see the petals that I put on the second concentric ring of decoration are starting to bloom now too. And as I continue to cup and push this and make it go inside out, the whole shape is going to start getting more and more spherical and marble-like. So there we go. There's 3 little flowers in there instead of just 1. If we're tricky, we could also do like 1 big flower and 2 little flowers, or a big, medium, and small. That would be clever. You can also take flower canes that you've pulled that are kind of 2-dimensional and put a whole bunch of them together on a disc, and then pick that disc up and turn the whole disc that you've pre-made inside out, and it can look like 15 little flowers. There, now that's really bloomed 3 little flowers. So here's the best way to hold that. It's still pretty hot. Glowing orange. Awesome. Let's do thumbnail face. Okay, we're done with that. But as I was doing that, the marble stretched. You can see the 3 flowers in there. So now the bottom is just about closed up. And I want to cover that irregular disc that's collapsed down into just a tiny dot now, which is kind of dirty and messy looking. I'm going to cover that with something nice, probably green. I like to do green. Teal, no. Here's green. There's a little concavity in the bottom right now that I want to get out. And I don't want to just push it closed. I want it to sort of pull itself closed with a little help from me. And there, I just did it. Now, cover that with some green, as if it were another leaf. So I'm going to gather from a regular sized green rod, and I want to leave a decent sized blob on there. Knock that off. And I want to make it a little bit hemispherical on that side, so I'm going to push it into a mold. A little bit hemispherical. Now I want the clear and the green to smooth together so there isn't a line, so I'm going to heat it and let surface tension do most of that for me. And then I'm going to use my marble mold, hemispherical graphite mold, make that free end of the marble a little more perfect in its sphericalness. I start off in a mold that's bigger than the whole marble, and I go to one that's slightly smaller where I'm just using the rim. And so that looks kind of like one flower from the side, but it's actually 3 flowers. Alright, let's decorate that little green bit with some red dots. Let's see, do I have any red and black ones? Yeah. Alright, so to mirror a flower, I'm going to put a row of little black dots on the inside. Then I'm going to take some red dots. Draw some petals on the edge. And melt those in. Hard to see. There we go. I left myself a little undecorated spot right in the middle, and that's where I'm going to attach my next attachment point. I'm going to attach my attachment point. I'm going to attach an attachment point. I'm going to take a steel rod and heat that up and grab that right in the middle of that little circle of black dots. Then I'm going to melt and detach this clear rod from the marble that it's attached to right now. So, attached with my little steel handle. Just melt off that large clear rod. Then we'll decide how much clear we want to leave above the flowers. And the idea is, for me, to have the flower almost completely fill the marble. Not totally, I want some magnification above there, but you can see there's quite a lot of glass that I would have to squish back in there. And you can see where the marble really should end. So let's take away the piece that's not part of this marble. First grab. take one more. And then I'm going to look for any glass that's got dirty parts showing that I can just clean up. In here you can, when the glass reaches a certain temperature, you can really see all the impurities. So there we go. Let's put it through the marble molds. We're going to go through a bigger one to get our shape approximate. Just a little light pressure. And we're going to go through a smaller one and turn it and change the axis as we spin. And that's going to get it quite spherical. Not necessarily smooth, but look at that. You can see 3 little flowers inside the marble. And then there's another flower reflected on the back end. So now the marble design is complete. Only thing that remains is to get the outside smooth on the side that's not attached to a handle. I'm going to let the heat of the flame do most of that for me. Now I'm letting the surface cool. And I'm going to get a cherry marble wood mold, which is a cherry paddle that has holes drilled in it. And I'm going to use just the rim of one of those for like 2 seconds. Go to the next one. Use that for like 2 seconds. And the fine carbon layer over the cherry wood that's been burned just floats the glass, makes it very smooth. And now let's look at the reflection from the lights above as we turn it and see. And it's party time. Hi, Barbie. And that is very smooth. I'm going to give it one more round of just flame polishing, just to get out any little teeny tiny ones. I made a triple flower.
Oh, awesome. They look black. What color is it really?
Red. Little rosebuds.
There you go.
Yeah, red, orange, yellow, all turn black. And you can see with practice that they are one of those colors that's going to resolve into what's called a special color. Any color that's made with more expensive oxides, but red, orange, yellow, pink.
No fuchsia.
I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe.
You've tried.
I have tried fuchsia. It is a difficult color. I have some different ideas now than I did the last couple of years ago that I can make that.
Oh, I want to try that again then.
Okay. So I took a clear rod and melted the end and made it into a little pencil point, because I just want that little tiny point to be my last attachment point on this marble. And I want it to be fused to the surface but not become one with the marble. And that's long. Turn it my way. Alright, so now that I'm attached with that little tiny pencil point on a glass rod, I was able to melt off my stainless steel rod, and there's just a little mark where it attached. You can see it. It's a dot in the middle of those other dots. And that's actually oxidation from the metal. So I'm going to pinch that closed and then melt it. I want to push it flat as a paddle. Being a little bit stubborn. Close up. Now I'm going to round that a little bit. And the marble mold, start in the bigger one. Oops. And my attachment point came off, so I need to reheat everything quickly and get a new attachment point on there. There it is. So my attachment point was a little bit too weak, popped off. While it was sitting in the marble mold, the graphite drew too much heat out of the marble and it put a little crack in the surface. That little crack trapped some air and made an imperfection in the surface of the marble. I'm going to see if I can heat that out. But my final attachment point is now going to be on the other side, so there's going to be one more pass. Since I had to put kind of a too hot attachment point on this front surface of the marble where you'd normally be looking down on the flour, I want to go back and examine that and make sure that it is smooth and clear. It doesn't interfere with how the marble looks from its most viewable angle. Right, so now it's spherical on that side. Got some ripples. You can see in the reflection it jumps a little bit as we're spinning around. So let's heat. Let surface tension aid us as we continue to keep it this spinning. You always keep your glass spinning, otherwise it's going to droop and it won't keep the shape that you want. Alright, I'm heating it past the point to where it's drawing together, but only barely. Now I'm letting it cool and the surface is hardening. The surface hardening is what I need to happen before I can put it through my cherry wood paddles, because the surface has to be hard and below a certain rating of temperature so that it doesn't stick to the wood. So let's do a few rotations through this cherry wood paddle. And now we'll have to repeat the last attachment point. Heating a clear glass rod, making the point pencil shaped, making sure the surface of the marble is the right temperature to receive this handle. You want them to be close to the same temperature. If one surface is cooler than the other, then it won't make the firmness of the attachment that you require to do your last manipulation. So like I have to do a little flame polishing and run this unattached side through the cherry wood mold. Maybe I can just flame polish it here. So I had to go on to the surface and take that little imperfection off. So now the shape of my marble has become imperfect again. So I am going to have to go through the graphite paddle briefly. Bring my marble back into shape. So now it's spherical again, but it has ripples on the surface. To get rid of the ripples, I'm going to use just the heat of the flame and spinning. I'm heating so much of the marble, the pumpy, so it got a little bit mushy on me. That's okay, it's a small attachment point. Now I'm going to let the surface harden and do the last pass through the cherry wood marble molds. Then I have a fiber blanket, a hardboard fiber blanket type thing with divots pressed into it that will rest the marble. Then I can tap off the last attachment point. So I will chill with my jacks, which in this case are scissors, the point where the rod attaches to the marble, and tap it off. And I did. I'm going to pick up my torch and polish that area. What I'm doing is I'm applying a lot of heat, then I'm easing off. Then I'm applying a lot of heat very quickly, then easing off. I want to do this as quickly as possible, but I don't want to burn the surface of the marble. So I'm going fast as possible. Now I'm going to grab a wire tweezers that I made, that's especially for grabbing marbles. I'm going to heat it up until it becomes orange and let it cool to black. And then when it hits black, I can pick up my marble without leaving a mark on it. I picked up my marble, and this can go into the annealing oven. The annealing oven, I mentioned casually, is actually a kiln that I have a temperature control on, so I can keep it at about 960 degrees Fahrenheit. I put the marble in there without letting it get below that temperature so that it doesn't crack. Then, once it's in there, 960 is just energetic enough so that all of the molecules that I've bent the bond angles of can realign and become happy, well-adjusted bond angles where they feel like they can be together forever. And then I cool it and everything becomes permanent and what is called annealed, where all the stress has been relieved from the glass in my manipulation. And let's see, I think that's enough for today because it's hot. And I like that pine cone idea. I think I'm going to do that. There's like an inside-out technique where if you go beyond where you're blooming a flower and go all the way through the marble, it's kind of where I was going with the pine cone, but it also applies to the inside-out method for doing like what's called a ribbon core or a cat eye, which is also... people are not interested in purchasing them, but it's a very interesting technique and demonstrates control of the inside out to its ultimate conclusion, which is interesting but doesn't always look cool. But I thought maybe a pine cone would look cool, or like a hop bud, or if you could maybe do a raspberry like that, that would be really neat. It'd be doing petals as little tiny dots, as close as you could get them together, but leaving a space in between, and then turning it inside out with a flower, but then instead of leaving glass on the end as a lens, like if this was the flower, and this was the lens of the finished marble surface, you'd pull this almost to the surface, and then so instead of a flower bloomed out like this, it would be a very textured looking, interesting cone or berry. And we'll try that in a month. I like to get back to flowers every 4 or 5 weeks, so we'll do that then. And next week is a mystery. We'll figure that out then. So thanks for coming and watching tonight live, and as well as in replay. And this will be on YouTube in a few months, and then when it rotates off YouTube and Facebook, it'll be on Patreon, which someone eventually will sign up for. I am confident. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.